In 1644 the king in Oxford town did dwell, though he'd heard that Cromwell's army was nearby.
Well, it wasn't quite like that, but more about that later.
Now the king's men fought in red and gold, though Cromwell's men were plainer. The blood they spilled was coloured just the same. Through the hedgerow's fragile cover, I saw brother killing brother, and all of this was done in Jesus' name.
It's stirring stuff, isn't it? Just imagine, a quiet little village like Cropredy is suddenly drawn into an atmosphere of blood, sweat, and smoke. But why Cropredy? What would two big armies hope to achieve by bringing their ungentlemanly war to here? Well, today I'm here to answer that question. The year is 1644, and it's the Battle of Cropredy Bridge. Now picture this. Your country is in a state of civil war. The king and his parliament have been fighting it out for nearly 2 years. Their previous encounters at Edge Hill and then Newbury were bloody, but did little to decisively tilt the advantage towards one side or the other. As an ordinary citizen, you'll be doing your best to cope, but by now, you're probably sick and tired of war, right? Take Anne Harrison, for example, a woman who's been forced to move to Oxford because of her family's support for the Royalists. Her thoughts on her suffering says it all.
We finding ourselves like fishes out of the water. We knew not at all how to act any part but obedience. We came to a baker's house in an obscure street. At the windows, the sad spectacle of war, sometimes plague, sometimes sickness of other kinds, by reason of so many people being packed together. For my own part, I began to think, we should all, like Abraham, live in tents all the days of our lives.
So what hope is there for this war and its misery to end? What chance is there for any side to gain an advantage? Well, in the south and centre of England, it may come from one man, Sir William Waller. He's probably not the man you're thinking of, but at this point, Oliver Cromwell was still just a subordinate Lieutenant General of Cavalry, and fighting in campaigns further up north. Good old Sir William, meanwhile, had already made a name for himself during the war in the southwest and Midlands, gaining the nickname William the Conqueror. Born in Kent, Waller was a loyal but empathetic parliamentarian, skilled at manoeuvres with speed, deception, and surprise. Sure, he's had a few setbacks, but so far he's still done a lot for his cause, and now, in May 1644, Parliament is sending him on a mission. He's to catch a king. You see, Waller and his superior, the Earl of Essex, are to launch an attack on the royalist capital of Oxford. King Charles I's forces are vulnerable, as they've been put on the defensive following Waller's recent victory at Cheriton. Plus, the rest of the royalist army is heading up north to campaign in Lancashire and Yorkshire. So the parliamentarians have a great opportunity to strike at the king's turf. But it won't be easy. For starters, Waller and Essex have a bit of a rivalry going on, so they're not always cooperating very well. Even if they could, the king isn't just going to stand by in Oxford and wait for his enemies to come. So he sends some of his best generals, including Lord Jacob Astley, one of his best infantry commanders, to prevent the parliamentarian forces from getting to Oxford, To do this, they would have to defend the river crossings across the Cherwell and the Thames. So that's quite a dilemma, eh? But surely the Earl of Essex, who's been holding Parliament's army together since 1642, and the so-called William the Conqueror, can overcome it, right? Okay, so the campaign for Oxford started on the 14th of May 1644, with the Parliamentarians moving to first capture Reading. The Royalists soon abandoned it on the 18th, since its garrison was weak, though the Parliamentarians did not capture the town until the 23rd, once they had successfully crossed the Thames. Abingdon was also abandoned by its outnumbered garrison a week later. The Parliamentarians captured the town a day later on the 26th. So far so good, right? When Essex and Waller's forces then split up to approach Oxford from different directions, however, things begin to go less smoothly. Essex tries 3 times to cross the Cherwell at different points, and fails when the Royalists successfully push him back. Waller, meanwhile, is more successful, and his army crosses the Thames here at Newbridge on his second attempt. But due to Essex being delayed, by the time both commanders get close to Oxford in early June, King Charles and his army have already left the city. And what's more, when Essex and Waller meet on the 6th to decide what to do next, Essex makes the baffling decision to leave Waller and instead go to relieve the siege of Lyme Regis. Clearly, the tension between the two had only gotten worse. Whilst you might think he'd be furious, Waller in fact couldn't be happier that he now gets to do the rest of the job himself. Now at this point, when Waller begins pursuing the Royalist army, the king basically takes him on a wild goose chase, and again gives him the slip at the River Severn by destroying the bridge at Bewdley. As Waller follows the Royalists via the east bank of the Severn, he is once again slowed down by their breaking of bridges behind them, including at Evesham. Unable to follow, Waller changes tactics and heads towards Stone-le-Wold. He reaches it after going via Tewkesbury and Gloucester. Then he enters Warwickshire to continue pursuing the Royalists. The king, meanwhile, after coming from Buckingham, stayed here at Magdalen College School in Brackley on the 26th of June. Yet it wasn't till the next day, when he was at Culworth, that he received news that Waller was near Banbury. Quickly, the king and his army hurried there and faced off against Waller's army, which deployed itself here, on Crouch Hill. The Royalists then positioned themselves beyond Banbury, with the Cherwell and Banbury castles separating the two sides. Though troops from both armies skirmished in the hamlet of Neathrop that day, Waller did not dare to start a proper battle. Eventually, on the morning of the 29th of June, the Royalist army departed for Daventry, with Waller in pursuit. And soon, they're getting close to the village of Cropredy. Both armies, each numbering about 9,000 men, were itching for a fight. and the inevitable could hardly be delayed.
Once he had reached Great Bourton, just outside Cropredy, Waller drew up his army on the hill. Seeing that a gap had opened up in the formation of the Royalist army, he decided it was time to strike.
Perhaps he would be able to cut off the rear of the Royalist army.
So the engagement starts sometime around 11 AM, with the parliamentarians no doubt yelling, "Victory without quarter!" This, of course, was their field word for the day. Waller's first move is to send a detachment of troops under Lieutenant General John Middleton to capture Cropredy Bridge.
Stationed at Cropredy Bridge is Royalist Colonel Hooper's dragoons, who are about to be surprised by Middleton's cavalry.
Middleton then has to cross the Cherwell to attack the Royalist vanguard, which is approaching the ford up at Hayes Bridge, just outside the village of Chipping Warden. Amongst the parliamentarian officers taking part in this action is Thomas Ellis, who would later write about what unfolded in these moments.
They had placed a guard to secure Cropredy Bridge, which we readily beat off and made the bridge our own by a party of dragoons, and passed over the river between us and Banbury. Being over the river, through misinformation, we too speedily pursued the enemy.
Indeed, capturing Cropredy Bridge was easy enough, but Ellis was right. For when some parliamentarian cavalrymen pursue the Royalist dragoons to Hayes Bridge, they discover that some Royalist infantry are already there waiting for them.
Their foot made a stand, drew up and faced us, we being within musket shot of them. They overthrew a carriage to barricade the bridge and planted it with musketeers. This occasioned our retreat back again, being unwilling too far to engage ourselves.
The Royalist defence of Hayes Bridge was conducted by musketeers under Colonel Anthony Felwall. With support from the cavalry brigade of Lord Wilmot, they succeed in forcing the parliamentarians to retreat back to Cropredy.
If that wasn't bad enough, some nearby Royalists, led by the Earl of Cleveland, counter-attack with a cavalry charge towards the remainder of Middleton's division, back at Cropredy Bridge. This starts a running fight between his and their cavalry.
It's a chaotic scene, described best by one of the King's Privy Councillors, George Digby. My Lord Cleveland so madly struck such a terror into them, as that their horse thought the devil had come upon them in a cloud of dust. So now, Cleveland, supported by Sir Bernard Ashley, forces Middleton to temporarily withdraw.
Meanwhile, Sir William Waller's own division of 1,000 horse have advanced to take the ford, down here at Slap Mill.
The crossing at the ford goes well, and he leaves behind some musketeers to defend it, before moving towards Williamscote Hill.
Unfortunately, they are attacked by the Royalist Earl of Northampton's brigade, which advances downhill.
So as Waller advances from Slap Mill towards Williamscote, Northampton is able to repel his attack with his force of about 900 cavalry.
Waller is eventually forced to withdraw his division back to Bolton Hill.
For now, the Royalists are prevented from following by the musketeers defending Slap Mill's fort. Back beyond Hayes Bridge, the king has realised that his rearguard is under attack. He then quickly dispatches his life guard under Lord Bernard Stewart to go help Wilmot reinforce Lord Cleveland. Suddenly, the parliamentarian cavalry that had been retreating from Hayes Bridge, including our good friend Thomas Ellis, also arrives near Cropredy to see what is happening. As Ellis dramatically relates,
We advanced up to their body on the left hand up the hill, and with our 4 troops charged the King's Own Regiment and put them to a retreat.
Ellis and his comrades charge to hit Cleveland in the flank.
But their success is short-lived.
Bearing down on them from the north is Wilmot and the King's Lifeguard. Despite Wilmot being wounded and briefly taken prisoner, the Royalists once again force the Parliamentarian cavalry to retreat.
Cleveland, now joined by the King's Lifeguard, and Lord Wilmot's troops, rallies his own troops by the Wardenton Ash Tree, of which the current iteration stands here. And then he makes a second cavalry charge, this time routing the Parliamentarian cavalry.
Once again supported by Wilmot, Cleveland's second charge is a resounding success. The Parliamentarian retreat is very disorderly.
And then the Royalists fall upon most of the Parliamentarian artillery, which is stationed in a nearby field across the river.
With great valour and initiative, Cleveland's sweep forwards allows the Royalists to capture a total of 14 pieces of ordnance.
As you can tell, the results are catastrophic for the Parliamentarians. Not only have the Royalists taken most of the Parliamentarian artillery, along with Lieutenant General James Wemyss, but Middleton's division have taken a serious mauling. So, Waller's forces are now falling back and have to go on the defensive, but the battle is not over yet. After his recent successes, King Charles has moved his forces here, to Williamscote, and is about to resume his attacks on parliamentary positions at Cropredy Bridge and Slap Mill. Before the assault on the bridge begins, Parliamentarian troops are still fleeing across it, crying out, "The field's lost! The field's lost!" Yet amazingly, two Parliamentarian regiments, the Tower Hamlets and the Kentish, gallantly led by Colonel John Birch, put up a heroic defence of the position. Here's what Richard Coe, another Parliamentarian, had to say about this.
"We got down 2 drakes to the bridge and stayed them off bravely, gave them so good a play all day that ere night they could not brag of their winning."
The Parliamentarian defence of Cropredy Bridge is successful enough for some infantry of the Tower Hamlets to charge forwards and rescue 3 of the 14 pieces of ordnance that had previously been captured.
Cropredy Bridge had been secured. Although the Parliamentarians were not successful in stopping the Royalists from finally taking Slap Mill, Waller did at least manage to force them to withdraw back to Williamscote, using his remaining artillery he had here on Bolton Hill to fire at them.
After finally capturing and crossing the ford at Slap Mill, the Royalists face their opponents, who are drawn up on Bolton Hill, till the evening. Then, both sides engage in a counter-barrage, though the Royalist guns make little impact. Eventually, the fighting slowly peters out, and the king attempts to negotiate with Waller. First, by trying to send him a message via his royal trumpeter. But whilst the Royalists are waiting for Waller's reply, the king is actually shot at by a Parliamentarian cannon. He wasn't hurt, but to the editor of a Royalist newspaper, this incident speaks volumes about why the Parliamentarians were fighting them.
"It was not the evil councillors, but the good king they fought against, not to rescue him from them, but to remove him from this present world."
Waller eventually declined the king's offer to negotiate, as he could not do so without Parliament's permission. To his surprise, however, and I kid you not, The king's trumpeter then handed him a personal letter. It was from a former fiancée of his, who in Waller's own words, besought me to betray my cause. No doubt embarrassed, Waller essentially replied that, as I had never been traitor to my love, so I would not to my cause. He never heard from this woman again. Nevertheless, after both armies slept and continued to face each other throughout the next day, the Royalists received news that Parliamentarian Major Richard Brown was coming from Buckingham to reinforce Waller. So soon, the king began withdrawing his forces at midnight on the 30th of June, as did Waller on the morning of the 1st. Out of approximately 9,000 men, including those who later deserted, the Parliamentarians had sustained around 700 total casualties. The Royalists, on the other hand, with a similar number of men, only received light casualties, which may have included no more than 20 men killed. With the casualties his side had suffered in mind, perhaps then it is no surprise that Richard Coe recorded the sad sight he witnessed when the Parliamentarians left Cropredy and the surrounding area.
A mile off the bridge we found many dead corpses lying naked and unburied, 40 graves in the highway and many stately horses, and in the church and churchyard were many commanders buried who had been slain in the fight.
The entire affair had been a dishonourable blow for the Parliamentarian forces, not just for the utterly humiliated Sir William Waller, whose overconfidence had played a large part in causing the setback, but also his men. Some of them were now turning mutinous and began deserting. The London regiments, in particular, were shouting, "Home! Home!" With his army now disintegrating and the Royalists too far ahead to pursue, there is nothing more that Waller can do to catch the king. The battle itself may have been a draw, but King Charles is now free to deal with the Earl of Essex during his next campaign in the southwest. So, for all that blood, sweat, and smoke, what else did the Battle of Cropredy Bridge really achieve? Well, whilst it certainly did break the heart of his army, Sir William Waller's experiences with that campaign helped him to realise a valuable truth. As he told his superiors in Parliament's Committee of Both Kingdoms, which was responsible for conducting the Parliamentarian war effort, "Till you have an army merely your own that you may command, it is in a manner impossible to do anything of importance." With this observation, a spark had lit a fuse that would lead to the creation of a professionally trained and well-disciplined fighting force, which believed wholeheartedly in the Parliamentarian cause, the new model army. But for all that was to happen later in this conflict, I think it's fitting to finish with these words inscribed on the current Cropredy Bridge, commemorating the events of the 29th of June, 1644.
In the dreams I have are red and gold, and the little stream becomes a flood from all my brothers killing one another, till waking I realize it's all my own dear blood.